We start now with our big stories, and we're grateful that you've taken the time to stay with us because this, what we're about to discuss, affects all of us. It's about our economy. And did you know, now as of September 2021, 341.8 billion, that was just how much our debt stock had hit. That is the equivalent of some 81.5% of our GDP, gross domestic product. What does all of this mean in a new year, 2022, where government does not have the e-levy on board yet and is struggling to raise the sort of funding needed? It's been borrowing from the local market. What does that mean to private enterprises? We get into this discussion with our crack team that we've put together. But let me say a very good morning to Professor Lord Mensah of the University of Ghana Business School, Senior Lecturer. A very good morning to you, Prof. If you could unmute so we can hear you, Prof. Can you hear me, Professor Lord Mensah? Okay, so we'll try to rectify that situation as he joins us via Zoom. We'll also be interacting, hopefully, with Dr. Ebu Turkson, Senior Lecturer with the Economics Department of the University of Ghana. But in the meantime, what are the facts and the figures? Let's crunch the numbers and find out what exactly is happening with our economy. Joining me for that discussion, Isaac Kofi. He is with our research desk right here at the Multimedia Group. You're looking sharp. Good morning. Good morning, Ben. Great. So let's crunch the hard figures. Where do we start from?
Right. So now let's start with the genesis of this whole problem, the deficit. So in 2022, government plans to spend an amount of 137.5 billion in 2022.
Right.
And in terms of revenue, government is projecting to raise an amount of 100.5 billion, which will leave a deficit of 37 billion.
Right.
So the question is, how are we going to fund this 37 billion we have as deficit? That's when borrowing and other factors come.
And even before we proceed, these are our expectations when it comes to revenue generation.
Projected.
That in itself could be problematic because that is your expected revenue generation. We don't know whether we'll actually be able to make the 100 or so billion because all of these are mopped up from different areas of
so like in 2021, we projected to raise an amount of 72.5 billion. And we're just able to do around 70 billion. So just as you said, they are projected figures. But as of, September end in 2021, our debt stock stood at 341.8 billion Ghana cedis for 2021. And domestic component, 163.7 billion, whilst external component, 178.1 billion. Now the question is, if government is borrowing from the domestic market, what is the consequences to the economy? So now let's look at the issuance calendar, which was for the first quarter of 2022. So this is the amount of money government wants to borrow in this period, in 2022, the first quarter. So in January, government is projecting to borrow an amount of 9.3 billion, Ghana cedis from the domestic markets, and it will borrow in February 7.55 billion Ghana cedis again from the domestic markets, and in March 7.65 billion Ghana cedis, which will give us a total of 24.5 billion in the first quarter of 2022.
So the highest we're looking at is in January, and following through, what would this really mean? The amounts to be issued and the domestic market. I know you're going to be telling us about that as you move on.
Exactly. Right. So now let's look at this chart. So you realize that the 24.5 billion Ghana cedis that government wants to borrow, from the domestic market, it will use 20.7 billion as rollover for maturities, like old debts. So you are spending 20.7 billion to, roll over old debts, and then you have just 3.8 billion Ghana cedis to yourself for other government expenditure in the first quarter of 2021.
Right. So right before we proceed, though, we do have Professor Lord Mensah joining the conversation. If you could unmute. Prof, good morning to you. Can you hear me, Prof? Professor Lord Mensah? Okay, we'll try to reconnect. I just wanted to at least salute you and usher you into the conversation right before we proceed. But let's move on, Kofi.
All right, now let's compare 2021 to 2022, a comparative analysis of how much we were borrowing from the local market in the first quarter of this 2 years. So now in 2021, the projected amount was 22.35 billion Ghana cedis, and in 2022, 24.5 billion Ghana cedis. Now, if you do the math, this will give you a percentage increase of 9.62%. If you compare the first quarter of 2021 and the first quarter of 2022, as far as the issuers calendar is concerned.
Any idea what could be accounting for this sharp increase? That is almost 10%. In terms of issuance.
It's all because of our deficits, widening deficits. That's accounting for government borrowing this huge amount of money from the local markets. So let's look at the effects of government borrowing from the local market. This is what we call the crowding out effect. The crowding out effect. So assuming this is the funds available for both government and private sector.
Right.
Government is how do you call it? Is taking away from this bowl with this huge pipe. And look at the private sector, with just this small pipe. So government is sucking away a chunk of the available, funds in the domestic market with this huge, pipe, leaving the private sector with just, some few funds.
So Isaac, to paint the picture, and this takes me back to News File with Samson Ladi over the weekend, where Dr. Priscilla Chum was speaking, and she was talking about the fact that over the years we've not seen a real growth when it comes to private sector unemployment, the numbers they are raking in, and even what they are churning out in terms of the economy. And this could be one of the problems, because once government in itself is crowding them out when it comes to available funds locally, then it means they are going to shrink. Production is going to go down. Employment levels are going to go down.
Exactly. So what we have available for both government and the private sector, government is taking almost everything away, leaving the private sector with just limited amount of funds to, expand businesses and then, create employment and other things. So now let's look at revenue versus expenditure. Okay. The story so far with respect to our, debt.
Before we get to that, let me try one last time. Professor Lord Mensah, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah, good morning, and good morning to our viewers.
Finally.
I can hear you loud and clear.
Finally. We're grateful to have you. Just hold for us briefly. We're engaging the numbers this morning in studio, and I'm sure you can see us. So we're just crunching the figures, and right after that, we'll get into the thick of matters with you, sir, with your agreement, so to speak. I hope that's well with you. All right. Thank you, Prof. So Ike, let's proceed. And this is crucial because since what? Is it 2012?
2012 to 2022.
We've had a steady increase in the figures. Walk us through them.
So what we have in green is the expenditure over the years, and then the red is the revenue we are generating. So if you should subtract the two, one from the other, you get the deficit. So we are looking at the widening deficits from 2012 to 2022, as far as, revenue versus expenditure is concerned. So in 2012, government was raising as high as 20.9 billion, government was spending as high as 20.9 billion and raising a total of 16.7 billion as of 2012. And fast forward to 2016, government was expending an amount of 51.1 billion and, projected to raise an amount of 33.7 billion.
At least more than half.
Exactly, in 2012. Now, if you look at the widening gap, just look at it from 2019 to 2021. You could see that the gap is, is widening. the gap is
actually
widening.
2018 thereabouts,
2018.
because right after 58.1, then we go to 67.85, and then it just balloons to 96, 113, and now 137.5
in terms of expenditure alone. So if you look at the gap, what we said earlier, 37 billion Ghana cedis, and the question is, how is government going to fund this 37 billion Ghana cedis we have as deficits in the economy?
But to be fair, Kofi, as you proceed, you would also notice from the trajectory that while our consumption or expenditure has increased, our revenue generation has increased alongside.
Exactly.
So we're getting bigger, we're expanding, our economy is expanding, so to speak. We are requiring more fuel, which is the money to shore up the system. But at the same time, we are also expecting to generate more. It's just that the figures are rising astronomically.
So it's just that you still have a very wide deficit, and that will be problematic. Although you are raising more, your expenditure also has gone up.
Right.
So here, let's look at interest payments. So from the loans we've been taking, how much are we paying as interest from 2012 to 2022? And from 2012, we're paying 2.4 billion, as interest payments as far as our loans are concerned. And then in 2019, the same story, 2018 to 2022, 15.8 billion, 2019, 19.8 billion, 2020, 24.6 billion, and in 2022, we are paying as high as 34.4 billion.
Let's look a bit at, because we know of our political system, and while we're not playing politics here, we would like to see how the different political elements have handled this. When we look at 2012, we see what? 2.4 billion. By 2016, it is 10.8 billion, almost 8 billion added on. Then we have 2016 to 2020, 10.8 billion, and now it is 19.8 billion Ghana cedis. So there to almost a 10-point increment. But from 2020 to 2022, I mean, just a matter of 2 years, less than 2 years actually, because we just entered 2022, it's moved from what, 19.8 to 37.4, almost double the sum.
Exactly. And then government is attributing this to, COVID-19 expenditure, as well as, what we have as IPP payments, And just as you said, 19.8 billion to 37.4 billion is quite, a huge... Staggering. Just look at this jump. We've never had such a jump since 2012, possibly because of, COVID. So from 19.8 billion to 37.4 billion in 2022.
And so these are the details, and I crunched the figures. When you add the 341.8 billion that is our public debt, you are looking at something around $56.9 billion, and that is the crux of the matter. But Kofi, any add-ons before we move with the conversation?
Well, the question is, how are we financing this debt? Government is looking at two ways, drawdowns from the central bank and then borrowing from the domestic markets. And as we've explained, if you're borrowing from the domestic market, then you should be expecting, the crowding out effect. And it all depends on interest rates. So let's just hope and see that, the interest will still be below, so that you don't have a lot of, people giving out their monies to government. Because government is the safest, agent to borrow to, because if you borrow to government...
Treasury bills, for example.
Exactly.
Bonds.
So what we looked at is spans from 91-day Treasury bill to as high as 10-year Treasury bill. So if you have people, or you have the private sector, the domestic markets giving out all the funds to government, that will be problematic to the private sector as far as 2022 is concerned in this situation.
Kofi, wonderful stuff. Thank you so much for joining us today as well. Thank you. Let's now proceed from here and interact with Professor Lord Mensah, who is standing by. Prof, thank you for staying with us. I'd like to find out very quickly from you, Prof. So looking at the latest development when it comes to the Fitch ratings, we've received a B negative with a negative outlook. Most people would tell you these economic jargons. Well, what does that really mean? If you could break it down for us, what does that really mean in terms of where we find our economy today, right now? Did you get that question, Prof? If you could unmute for us, if you're still with us. Dr. Turkson, can you hear me? Please unmute if you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Great.
Yes, I can hear you.
A pleasure to have you. If you caught the question, same one directed at you as well. This entire outlook, we hear usually from these institutions, financial institutions, credit worthiness of a country, from Fitch to all the others, Moody's and all of that. And this time we're being moved from a B to a B negative with a negative outlook. What does that imply in terms of our economy?
What it means is that the credit agencies are giving a signal to investors that in the immediate future, our fiscal indicators show that we are a bit distressed in terms of meeting our obligations for our debts.
That's the bottom line. That's all it means.
So, giving a signal to investors.
It appears the Zoom connection is not aiding us this morning. We'll try to reconnect with Dr. Ebo Turkson, and we'll try to work the lines as well to see whether we can get them over the phone lines. But in recent times, this is what we've been hit with. So we've been told that we've been downgraded in terms of the Fitch ratings. And Kofi, you're still here with me. Over time, I mean, we've again pendulated, swung from this side to that end. But this creditworthiness, at this point in time, we're battling COVID. We don't have the e-levy on to generate the sort of funding we require, which in itself is also part of why we've got this rating, because some people also look at our creditworthiness in terms of, if we give you money, are you going to be able to meet your debt obligations? Looking at what has piled up, so what has matured up to this point, and moving forward, will you be able to meet them? That is what the international community is looking at and saying no, and that has affected our creditworthiness. When you look at the charts, it means that we are actually way down there, even in terms of comparatively to other African countries. Yeah. What does it mean from your
So
end?
we must work hard not to reach the dreaded triple C ratings. But at the moment, Fitch itself is saying that although it has downgraded Ghana, but it's saying that they are still sure that the country will not default in terms of its payment, because we still have approximately $7.9 billion as international reserve, which we can use as liquidity, in settling this debt that we have on our hands at the moment.
Right. Prof. Turkson, welcome back.
All right, thank you.
Great. So you were making a point. I'll just have you start off the top with what you were saying about what this really means for our economy currently.
So I was saying that the implication of the downgrade is to give signals to investors who normally buy our bonds that based on the fiscal indicators as of now, we are going to be a little bit stressed in meeting our debt obligations. And that implies also that when you go on to the ICA, to borrow, the international credit capital market to borrow, those investors will be willing to give us their money and put a premium on that. And so we are going to pay a high interest rate. And that is what the downgrading means. But like I've said elsewhere, we don't need to panic about it. And so for me, what is important is that it's always come up for interrogation is, if your debt GDP ratio is high and you look to be distressed in servicing it, you need to ask yourself, what policies have you put in place currently to grow your economy and to put the economy on the path of fiscal consolidation that will enable the economy in the immediate future to be more comfortable at servicing this debt. And for me, looking at our macroeconomy and the plan that the government has told Ghanaians is in place, I have no doubt that there are the right policies that will let this economic grow. Don't forget that in 2020, when economies were receding, the Ghanaian economy grew. 2001, it grew at about 4%. We are projected that it's going to grow around 6%, way higher than the sub-Saharan African average.
Right.
So it means that there are structures and policies in place as we speak to move the economy forward, in growing the economy and consolidating our fiscal strength. And so I'm not going to panic for one moment because of these credit ratings that are perception-based. And also, I'm not saying that they are not useful. They affect how much investors are willing to lend to us. But they are very short-term ratings that can change over time if the indicators show that, look, Ghana would be able to service its debt. And then the grading is upgraded. The rating is upgraded. So don't let us panic. It calls for the managers of the economy to sit up to make sure that whatever plans were outlined in the 2022 budget are plans that we are going to meet, and so on and so forth, so that, especially with our program, fiscal deficit for the year around 7.4%, which should put in place policies to ensure that we are not going to go above that.
Right.
Now, these are the sort of things that we need to do as a country. But to us, what is important in all of this is the need for us to raise enough domestic revenue. Because at the center of all of this is the issue of what is the ratio of our domestic revenue that goes into interest payments. It's high. Debt service is high. And so it means that we are going to struggle in meeting other recurrent expenditure and capital expenditure. And so it gives an impression that then our debt deficit is going to even be higher than we are projected. So let us look at the programs and initiatives that the government has put in place to resolve the Ghana Revenue Agency to aggressively pursue the collection of taxes.
Right.
I've heard elsewhere that, it's not a matter of collection of taxes. Yes. Once we increase our domestic revenue, there are a lot of people in this economy that don't pay tax. And so as we make use of the digitization agenda or the drive that we've achieved so far to pursue tax collection efforts, I think that's the right direction.
Okay.
So Ghana shouldn't panic. Yes, it's worth looking at this. It's worth discussing. But we shouldn't panic just because we've got a downgrade in our rating.
Right. Prof, so I'll be talking about sitting up and what it really is going to entail. But you just spoke about taxes. And that's another interesting, perspective to look at, because even the taxes we do mop up, even from the population that we have, we don't make the most of it. There are so many slippages. I mean, the Ghana Statistical Service itself, the Auditor General, came out with data pointing to the fact that in the last year, slippages, wastage led to about 12 billion of taxes, getting dissipated, going into being siphoned into individual pockets and all of that, graft. And we're looking at 6.9 billion for an e-levy. You see the disparity in there. If we had tackled some of these slippages, though the tax net is smaller than we would have it be, we could have been tackling some of our problems and probably wouldn't find ourselves where we do now. So is it a matter of getting more taxes? It's like pouring water into a basket, or is it tightening the system to ensure that we can make the most of the little we do have? What do you think?
Exactly. I mean, so when I say we need to increase tax mobilization efforts, I'm not meaning that we need to introduce new taxes and all of that. Like you rightly said, we need to be very efficient. We need to ensure that our public sector is very efficient, and those slippages that leave the system that should have been revenue that is collected is minimized. I mean, there is no doubt that these things will happen, and there should be institutions in place to ensure that if it does happen, people are privileged to serve as a deterrent, and even there are policies in place to ensure that those leakages do not occur. So you actually said it, we should be very efficient in the mobilization of our domestic resource basket. But most importantly, I think that in all of this, providing the right support to the Ghana Revenue Agencies should help. We need to also take advantage of our digitization drive to also ensure that businesses that go online, the government is able to collect the taxes that have to be collected. And as Ghanaians, we need to also come to a realization that we can only fund our development and no one else. I mean, if we're raising enough revenue to fund our development, this issue of our international capital market and all of that will not come up. So it's important that as Ghanaians, I'm not calling for the introduction of new taxes, but we should be up to our civil responsibilities to try as much as possible to pay taxes when we are supposed to pay, especially for those in the informal sector, and so and for us to be a little bit protected by ensuring that in whatever role we play, wherever it is, we ensure that some of these leakages out of the tax revenue stream are minimized.
Right.
And it's very, very important. And also, it's important that the government will also ensure that the public sector is very efficient in its expenditure. Rationalize our expenditure and make sure that we are being very efficient.
Right.
So that at the end of the day, our fiscal deficit would be manageable, and then it begins to give a clear signal to the credit rating agencies that Ghana is doing something about it.
Okay.
I've had discussions about Ghana going back to the IMF for credibility, because that is what can only assure the investors that we are doing something about our situation and there's no need for panic. I mean, if it gets to that point, and that's what we need, I don't have any problem if the government will go back to the IMF. For the IMF to assure that the plans that the government has put in place would be carried out to its conclusion, so that we can have a little bit of reduced interest rates on the international capital market.
Right. Let's move the conversation forward. I don't know whether we have Professor Lord Mensah, so I'll continue with you, Professor Turkson. And right before I get into our back-breaking debts, the staggering debt we have to deal with now, I just want your quick take, very quickly on this one. Since we're talking about taxation, and you say you are not against taxation, are you for the e-levy? To what extent are you for the e-levy at 1.75%? What is your quick take on that? A nuisance?
I mean, the whole concept of the e-levy, which targets online businesses, online transactions, it's the right thing to do. I mean, in almost every part of this world, most countries are moving to using digital technology to mobilize revenue.
I know. Online. I think it's Cameroon or one of those neighboring countries that attempted 0.2% or so, and people were kicking vehemently against it. We are looking at 1.75%.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm going to that point. So what I was saying is that this e-levy thing is not a bad thing. Possibly, I think that if there was enough consultation before this proposal came up, there would have been enough buy-in into the rate at which the initial proposal was envisaging to collect. I think that for what the e-levy is going to be used for, some for the substitute for the road tolls that have been cancelled. I think that we could find other ways of collecting road tolls,
right? And
so that we can reduce the percentage of the e-levy.
Okay.
I mean, road tolls are supposed to be paid by vehicle users. I mean, so if I'm in the village and I don't drive on the road, I'm not supposed to pay a road toll. Those are road tolls have been cancelled. Why don't we look for a way in which we can collect a lump sum from every car that is renewed, is roadworthy for the year? That alone could collect some revenue to fund the part of the e-levy that was supposed to go into the road tolls. That is one of them.
Okay.
One country, for instance, increased taxes on alcohol and cigarettes. And the reason why I'm saying that is that the IMF has clearly indicated that Ghana is one of the middle-income countries that collects the lowest tax on these two. In economics, these are two products that, for revenue purposes, you can increase taxes on them and increase your revenue.
Okay.
If even it leads to a fall in the demand, the total revenue from that increased taxes is still higher than before. And if it causes a reduction in demand, it's also good for us because of the health implications of consuming these two products.
Okay, so these
So
are two areas.
Two birds, one stone.
Right.
It's something that the government can also take a look at. So that once this is done, then that 6.9 billion that we hope to collect, we'll find out if we can reduce the percentage.
Right, the tax component.
One, and then if you can increase the threshold, if we still insist on collecting the Momo e-levy, we can increase the threshold to maybe 200 cities or 300 cities.
Okay, so these are concessions that could be made.
Average artisans who collect some of their payments in Momo, 80 cities, 100, 120 cities will not suffer, especially those who collect their daily, what do you call it, allowance.
Right.
Through Momo will not suffer for it because they have.
Prof, just hold your horses. Just hold your horses on this point a brief moment. Let me connect with Professor Lord Mensah as well. Prof, can you hear me? Professor Mensah?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you loud and clear.
Great. Good to have you. Are you surprised about this downgrade of our economy in terms of our credit worthiness? And I'll have you go back. I have in my hand the Republic Press newspaper from the 26th of April 2021. It had to do with Sam Jonah's comments on the economy. And this is what he said. One of the most alarming aspects of our macroeconomic situation is the debt crisis. As at the end of 2020, total public debt reached 291.6 billion, representing 76.1. Now we've hit what? 340 plus billion, and it's into the 80% or approaching around 80%. He also goes on to talk about the fact that thus we are borrowing to consume and to service existing debts rather than for productive investment. This is from April 2021. This is January 2022, and we are seeing some of the very things that Sam Jonah said. So any surprise to you that we find ourselves with a downgrade and in dire straits in terms of our economy?
Yeah, I'm not surprised at all. If you look at our presence on the Eurobond market since 2007, beyond the 2007, every time we go to the market, if you look at the prospectus, you come to understand that we borrowed to defray, already existing debt, for which just some small amount comes into the economy to grow the economy. So, for instance, if our first time of going to the Eurobond market, we turned out we borrowed around 700 million. The subsequent year, we went there to borrow 900 million. Then it tells you that, okay, fine. We use the 700 to defray already existing debt. And then, the 200 comes into the economy to grow the economy. But then you ask yourself, why did we find ourselves in that situation? As of the time we're going to the Eurobond market, you realize that, we were fresh on the market. So borrowing very long term was difficult. And I remember very well, I think the first time we went there to borrow, it was about 7 years or so. Then you ask yourself, where are you coming to put the money to? I mean, where the investment you are coming to do with that money? Would they be able to generate, cash within that 7 years that you are borrowing for? That's a question we failed to answer at the time. You realize that we borrowed, but then the money went into projects which couldn't pay itself within the 7 years. So we had to go and borrow to come and what? To defray, already existing debt. Now, coming back to the ratings, you realize that the ratings are mostly outlook. And all the indicators that goes in there, if you sum it up, is our macroeconomic indicators, our debt levels, and then also your ability to raise, revenue in the future. Now, if you take, last budget that we read, I mean, clearly, it looks like all the policies, revenue enhanced policies that the government tends to roll out seem to be falling on rocks. Because if you take the e-levy, the plan was that it has to kick on within in January. But look at where we are now. And then if you take the benchmark value reduction, also it's having problems. And clearly, it tells you that government is struggling when it comes to the ability to implement some of its revenue enhanced policies. And so, if you are to create an economy of this nature, obviously you're going to downgrade it, because if you will be able to pay your debt, it has to do with your ability to raise money. And so, I always say that we shouldn't relate even our debt to GDP. We should relate it to our revenue generation. And so the ability to to raise money keeps on reducing every now and then. And that is why we find ourselves in this downgrade. And for me, I'm not surprised in that regard at all.
When it comes to the e-levy, which is a question that I just ran by Professor Ebu-Turkson, as an alternative means of raising or raking in money to cushion the economy, he says, well, he is for it, taxation, because other countries pay taxes. I averted to his mind to the fact that I think neighboring Cameroon even tried 0.2%. It was poo-pooed. What do you think of that, especially standing at 1.75%? Is it feasible ahead of Parliament reconvening on the 25th? Very quickly on that one, Professor Mensah.
Very good. It's unfortunate, a country like Ghana will be relying on taxes and levies to build its economy. I mean, we were here when we had promises like from taxation to production. And if we are to move from taxation to production, then we should expect that the drivers of revenue generation for this economy should be production. But we didn't see that. But then let's look at the e-levy per se. Yeah, clearly, the e-levy, I'm not against e-levy. I mean, every economy, when you exhaust all your resources, I mean, we had diamond, we had gold, we had, recently petrol and all those. You realize that relying on it for some time, it's going to dwindle. You cannot continue to rely on revenue from these, natural resources forever. And so once you lose your natural resources, the replacement is human resource. And taxes evolves around human activities. So as a result of that, if you are going to, raise revenue through levies and taxes, I'm not against it. But sometimes the margins that the government wants to rake in, and then sometimes the hardships that the economic agents are facing may not necessarily help in introducing things like that. So for instance, if you want to introduce taxes or levies, you should expect that every now and then, economic agent, if I say economic agent, I'm talking about, government is of the economic agent, also part economic agent, and then individuals are also part of the economic agent. If you want to introduce taxes, then you have to make sure that the economic agent and you introduce taxes, they will not feel it as expected. What do we see? For the past 5 years, we see only government in business. The reason why I'm saying this is that even though we can see monetary policy rate coming down and all those, at the banking hall, interest rate is not down. For individuals to confidently walk to the bank and say, I'm coming to borrow, for businesses to walk to the banks to say that I'm coming to borrow, and then I'll use that to expand my business, and therefore I'm going to employ, and through the employment, people will be engaged. And once they get engaged and they go on talk on their phone every now and then, you can start, taxing them. Once they start getting engaged and they get employed and they are transferring funds from one part of the economy to the other, you should be able to tax them. But this is not the case. That is why you always see, the economic agent resisting anytime government tries to introduce a levy. And so I would say that, yes, fine, I'm for it. But in the end, the economy must be well engaged. The people within the economy must be well engaged before you start introducing, such taxes. And then also, being the first time of its, sort, you don't just jump to 1.75. You could have whet the people's appetite for some time. Now, as we speak now, Ghanaians are new to this levy, and therefore, if you want to introduce it, make sure that you introduce it in a manner where anytime you rake in, you put in an investment, you float investment to indicate that your money is doing, and so therefore you gradually whet their appetite. So I would have loved, government should have done a bit of consultation to start with a certain,
Right. Thank you for making that point.
Before,
Okay, hold briefly for me, Professor Mensah, because there's something else I'd like you to look at briefly. But before that, Professor Turkson, so I just want us, Kofi, if you could just let me take a look at the figures. So from 2012, right from where you were. So from 2012, we're looking at, can I just take a look at that figure? We're looking at 20.9 billion Ghana cedis in terms of our expenditure. Prof, I'm just doing an expenditure revenue analysis here. 20.9 billion in terms of expenditure versus 16.7 billion estimated. You come to 2022, and our estimate in terms of revenue generation is 100.5, but it has ballooned our expenditure to 137.5 billion Ghana cedis. Is this sustainable over a period of just about 10 years? Look at how our expenditure has ballooned. Is this sustainable for an economy like ours?
I think that we should look at the reasons for, if I take a look at expenditure items and the reason why it has ballooned to that level. I mean, the economy as we speak has to grow. There are a lot of young men and women who are in the labor force who are looking for work and have not been employed. So any government that would be responsible for its citizens, we're looking at initiatives to try as much as possible to support the private sector to create those jobs for the youth. And that will come with a lot of investment. So if we do not mind, we can have a discussion on the content of our expenditure and not look at the whole sum in totality. Because
Prof, let's quickly do that. And I would like to single out one thing. Unemployment, for example, youth unemployment. This entire gargantuan sum that we're seeing out there, you look at the unemployment figures, and yes, we've had a number of policies and all of that. We've had NAPCO and all of that. But when you look at the real figures in there, it doesn't appear we're winning the battle when it comes to youth unemployment, for example. Again, you juxtapose that with the fact that, and I heard, I was making reference to what Dr. Chum of the economics department, your department at the University of Ghana, had been saying on Newsfile on Saturday that even the private sector is not growing in terms of its numbers, its output, the number of Ghanaians it is bringing in terms of job creation. So would you really say that what we've been expending is really having an effect on what we're expecting, our expenditure versus the expected outcomes?
No, I mean, so for instance, if you take the youth employment programs, initiatives in the budget, I also believe that there are too many of them. And I think that there is a lot of duplication that is going on. And because there's a lot of money that is also expended on these initiatives, it will be important for government to come back, look at the agencies that are involved under the different ministries, and try as much as possible to put them together to avoid the duplication and to give proper support that would offer the jobs for the young men and women. And I think that if we do that and reduce the amount that we spend on such youth employment initiatives, and rather use it to support the private sector, they are the ones that are supposed to generate employment. And so it is important, like Dr. Tumeti Bafo said, that the government supports the private sector to expand. And one way in which we can do that is to look at agro-processing. And I'm happy about the 1D1F because a lot of the firms that are being set up or those that are already existing and are being supported by government are in agro-processing. Now, this is very early, in the early stages of its its initiative. So let us look rather at the medium term, how this 1D, 1F, with the number of factories that are being built up, is going to provide the jobs that the youth need. And that is very important. So like I said, we need to take a look at what extent are we committing the chunk of our expenditure to expanding the productive capacity of our economy. If you look at the 10-point industrial transformation agenda of the current government,
Right.
are we pursuing that agenda to meet the objectives? There are so many things that we need to do, like, for instance, improving the business environment. And I know there are a lot of things that are going on now, and resourcing the public sector agencies that provide support for the private sector to flourish. So we are doing the right thing as we speak. The benefits of that will come later on. But as we do that, we should ensure that every amount of resources, whether we borrow it or we raise from our domestic resource, that is going into expenditure should be in furtherance of expanding the productive capacity of this economy. It's very, very critical.
Right.
So we need a much more, for instance, I've said it earlier part of last year, that we need to begin to have conversations on some of the expenditure items. Do we need that big size of parliament? Can we have a conversation of reducing the size of parliament, for instance?
Right.
So that we can also reduce some of the expenditure items. Can we have a conversation on the maximum number of ministers and deputy ministers that Ghana would be able to fund?
I mean, I heard someone recently make mention of the fact that, I've forgotten whether it was Professor Jampo who was talking about the fact that the fuel they get for free, for example, can we mitigate that, ensuring that maybe they are paying for the fuel, or maybe even...
Precisely. I mean,
yes.
this is the conversation that we need to have. So that, because for me, even though democracy is one of the best things that have happened to us, it's looking like it's becoming too expensive for us. So
Right.
we are always struggling to try to look for resources to meet our expenditure.
Right.
So we need to begin to have conversations on that to see if we can be more efficient.
Okay.
Also reducing the size of government, reducing the size of parliament, and ensuring that the parliamentary service is a service to the nation and not necessarily one that people would move in because they need to make money.
Okay.
It's very, very important. So that if we begin to see lawmakers as lawmakers and ensure that our local government system, which is one of the best in the world, is resourced to be what it is, then our representation will be on the local government.
Okay.
The local government will be the development agents and not members of parliament.
Okay.
We will focus on providing the laws and the legislature and all of those things that are important for Ghana's development process.
Okay.
These are the conversations that we should be having. And I think that insofar as we are still expending, our budget deficit is always going to hang around our neck. And that is why it factors into some of these credit agencies' ratings of our economy. And they are concerned whether we are even going to be able to meet the 7.4% budget deficit for 2020.
Right.
Others
Right.
have said that we might hit
Right.
10% or 11%.
Right.
When these signals go out there, then the credit agents would have to downgrade our ratings and let the investors know that, look, if you are giving money to Ghana, be careful because the future doesn't hold good in terms of fiscal indicators. But we can do something about it.
Okay. And there are a number of things you have proffered, but for the sake of time, Prof, we're going to have to leave it here. Professor Turkson, we're so grateful you took the time off to join us this morning, sir.
Thank you for the privilege.
We're very grateful. And that was Professor Abel Turkson, Senior Lecturer, Economics Department, University of Ghana. Professor Lord Mensah, are you still with us? Can you hear me?
Yes, I am. I am.
Great. So I'm going to dedicate the rest of the time on this to you because your connection has not been very good. And I just want to find out from you. So when you look at the numbers, when it comes to how much government is hoping to take from the domestic market, Kofi, can you just put that figure there when it comes to the crowding out effect? So the crowding out effect. I think it's the next slide to your right. Next one. Okay, so government is hoping to get some 20.7 billion locally. Okay, 20.7 billion. I think it's the next one, Kofi. Let's do the one with, yes, that one. So you realize that the chunk of money that government is hoping to secure from the local front is going to have a pull-down effect on local industry, because they are also going to be hoping to get something from that same pool of money. And crowding out is going to happen. What is going to be, what do you foresee being the impact of this on the local market? Because local industry is going to be hoping to tap from the same pool that government is going to get this chunk out of. What do you foresee being the impact?
I mean, this has been happening all this while. I mean, it's not now that government is going to boom, but, the biggest funds that is floating in the system, or the investable funds. Government over the years, looking at the policies that are being rolled out, or that has been rolled out, clearly has indicated that they are going to be in business, not a private man. They are going to be in business in a sense that even though we boast of monetary policy coming down to a level where, we've not been before, it is not transmitting directly to the banking hall. And with the reforms and all those restructuring of the reference rate, clearly you could see that that exercise was not an exercise that was supposed to be, because we thought earlier on that the banks are pricing loans based on their internal structures and based on their internal characteristics, and therefore let's shift the pricing of loan, the baseline of pricing of loan, to the market. That is when the current administration came in, and earlier on they introduced what we call the Ghana reference rate, which is mainly driven by the monetary policy rate, the treasury bill rate, and all those. And clearly, the monetary policy rate has been coming down, but we don't see that reflection in the loan pricing. And so the private sector has not been having the access to funds over the years. And this could also be as a result of liquidity issues, because it could be that the banks don't have the necessary funds to lend. And the little that they have, because government has more affinity to attract investable funds, they would like to invest with the banks. Sorry, they would like to invest with the government, and therefore invest in treasury bills and all those. If you catalog the asset side of the banks, you could see clearly that most of their investments are with the Ghana government in bills. And so clearly this has been happening over the years, and that is why we don't see much expansion when it comes to the private sector. And anytime government indicate that signal of being in business, when it reaches out budget, providing for the people directly without channeling it through the banking sector or the corridors of the banks, clearly it gives you the signal that yes, the private man will be struggling along the line. So this has been happening. It's not now. It's not now that we're going to see that this crowding out effect. The private man, access to funds has been limited over the years, and it's not now, please.
Right. Initially, earlier, you were speaking about production. And this is where it gets interesting, because even in our productive industry, we have quite a lot to digest. So we are looking at the fact that about 50%, mining contributes about 50% of FDI, foreign direct investment. Of that, gold alone contributes some 90% in terms of Ghana's total mineral exports, and 49% of the country's total export value. Now put that side by side with the reality of finite resources, and this is what I mean. In 1994, South Africa was producing about 20 million ounces of gold, when the global total was about 81 million ounces, which means that South Africa alone was producing about 25% of the global output. You bring that to 2020, when Ghana took over as the #1 producer. South Africa is no longer the biggest producer in Africa when it comes to gold. Ghana was not on the radar, not on the charts at the time. Here we are in 2022 as the biggest producer of gold on the continent. But again, the reminder is that this is a finite resource. You look at our black gold, the oil that now we're finding practically everywhere. That too, many countries are beginning to move away from fossil fuel. Some will say that it will take quite a bit of time. But the point to be made is that with even our natural resources and production, nothing is guaranteed moving forward. So what do you think we can do with these? I mean, who knows what in 20, 40 years, how many gold resources we would have left, how many oil resources we would have left. What do you foresee that we should be doing to prevent even tighter constraints on our economy as far as production and our mineral resources are concerned?
Well, I like your question, and with the direction where you are coming from, that mineral resource cannot be relied on for a longer term. So effectively, whilst you having it now, your policies are supposed to be oriented in such a way that you develop into the future. If you know very well that your black gold has no future, what are you doing with the revenues that are being raked in from your black gold? Do you invest in the people so that they can be innovative, so that they can move into areas that can help the economy without, necessarily relying on that black gold in the future? So it depends on what you do with the cash flows that comes from the black gold. Now, we had gold. I grew up in a mining area, Akwetia, for instance. I mean, typically, it was an area where, diamond was, something that you can easily boast of. Early morning, you can even wake up and pick diamond. It's no more. Did we invest in the people over there? If you go to Akwetia now, it's one of the poorest, part of Eastern region, as you can imagine. And I can tell you the reason why we're struggling like that. Because as of the time that revenue was being generated from the diamonds, we never turn up to look at the people, what they can do if the diamond should, go away. So we always have to look at the future. Now that, fossil fuel has become more or less an enemy to the globe, looking at these climate change issues and all those, what are we doing going forward to think about alternatives? Even if we are supposed to import, alternative, use of revenue, fossil fuel, can we, cope with the situation? How are we positioning our economy to ensure that we can also go with, that no fossil fuel kind of economies in the future? So these are all things that we may have to look at when it comes to our revenue reorientation. Our policy reorientations.
Okay, and speaking of policy reorientation, so just to wrap the conversation, Prof, I've heard Bright Simmons, recently he put up a tweet concerning the fact that we are practically broke as an economy, as a country. Prior to that, we had the likes of finance analyst, expert, Joe Jackson of Dalex Finance saying, he's been saying this since last year, that we are broke. Sam Jonah has been pointing to the fact that we're approaching brokenness, if you like. I spotted this little bit of analysis on social media, and I wanted to share with you. I don't know what your take is. I want you to answer, are we broke? And do you agree with this person who says, clearly, the issue is not that Ghana is broke, but that it is broken. To mend its broken policy making and restore the country to creditworthiness, the government and its enabling political class must admit the brokenness of the current public finance model and solicit genuine multi-stakeholder support to cut another path. What do you make of whether we are broke or not and this person's suggestions? To wrap the conversation, Prof.
Well, I would say we are not broke. Ghana is never broke. A country that is broke has no ability to generate, revenue. Now, if you look at, Ghana as a country, I would say that we're not broke, but we are not able to prioritize our, spending.
Right.
That is what is making it looks as if the country is broke. We're not broke. Because a country that will be able to generate revenue of about 70 billion Ghana cedis, what makes it a broke country? Now, if you look at the policies that are being churned out over the years, even in our recent budget, you could see that government tries to, put in measures to enhance revenue, right? But then the only difficult thing is that government hasn't got a political will to look at the expenditure side. If you look at the expenditure side carefully, you realize that there are some key areas you may not want to touch. And at the end of the day, if you relate that to our revenue, you realize that more or less what we generate is what is what we can spend. We are not doing that. What we're doing in this country is that we're spending more than necessary. We're spending into efficient sectors of the economy. All our expenditure is going into areas which is not necessarily generating revenue back in the system. Right. When we talk about efficient spending, in economics, what we mean is that, you see, your revenue is your output. Your expenditure is more or less an input. So relate the expenditure to the input. If for nothing at all, whatever you spend on should be able to generate, revenue as expected going forward. So a country that is broke cannot, raise revenue as, indicated in our budget over the years. So we are not broke, but it's a matter of, prioritizing our expenditure.
Right. Professor Lord Mensah, thank you so much for your time with us. Professor Lord Mensah is a lecturer at the University of Ghana Business School. Do have a good day, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Great. And just to wrap in the studio, Kofi, so you've patiently, had us discuss all of this. What would be your takeaways in just about 30 seconds, 1 minute? What would be your major takeaways from this discussion?
Well, Ben, you have a deficit of 37 billion to finance. Now you've lost access to the international market. The question is, are we going to see, government's pipe, in the domestic market widening to crowd out the private sector? If so, if you compare, just like Lord Mensah said, Professor Lord Mensah said, if you compare our debt to our revenue that we are generating, projected revenue, it means that our debt levels is about more than three times what we are projecting to generate in 2022, and that is problematic.
Very problematic. Well, we hope we can get out of the doldrums. But Kofi, thank you so much for joining me this morning. How much do you know about the Smarts app as a parent, for example, and how much do you know about what it can do for your children or your wards? Well, stay with us. In the next few minutes, we'll be catching up with them, and we'll find out how exactly you can help your children learn better right here on the AM Show.